The newspapers have covered this quite a lot, but I'd like to get it in the record, as I said. If AIG had been allowed to fail, what would have been the consequences for Goldman, and why?
You know, this is an issue, that subject that we hear, obviously we hear a lot about. So much about it, by the way, that we put an explanation on our website where it sat for a couple of months as to what happened. But we had transactions outstanding with AIG. Because of the protocols of our risk management, we had margin arrangements with them.
Well, these are credit default swaps you're talking.
Credit default swaps.
Mm-hmm.
The positions over time eroded, with the result that they owed us a lot of money. They owed us and paid, literally gave us the cash in our possession with respect to the mark-to-market loss. I'm sorry.
Well, go ahead.
Yeah.
Finish. But
with respect to the difference, we held the cash. During the pendency of this period and through 08, we were marking to market, as is our regimen, and we were probably one of the most aggressive markers to market, because that's our regimen, and we called them for more margin, and they became very slow in giving margin, such that there was a gap. As a result of our protocol, which doesn't allow us to take more than a certain amount of risk, we went out and bought our own protection against their credit, such that the combination of literally the cash we had and the credit derivatives we had from other big financial institutions with whom we also had margin arrangements, so we had the cash for them, effectively covered what would have been the loss.
What was the total coverage that you had?
We had on the exposure of about, and again these numbers are more specific and available, and so I'll do the best I can, are about $10 billion of exposure, against which we had, I believe, about $7.5 billion worth of cash, literally cash, and $2.5 billion of credit protection. Now, maybe that cash is marketable securities, but they'd have been agency or government securities, cash-like.
What were these credit default swaps covering or insuring you against? What was
against
the nature
a default
of the
an event of default by AIG, to my best.
not the ones you bought, but the ones that AIG was originally covering. What kinds of assets were they? Were they what people call toxic assets? Were they CDOs?
They were
backed securities?
They were, and again, I think there were a lot of assets, and some of the elements of our business with AIG was with other parts of AIG and included other thing. But to the point, I think the main part of it were CDO-like pools of securities.
Okay, so you were holding such as investments. These were not in your trust.
Well, actually, we had. And again, I don't want to get too far over my skis on the technicality of a bunch of these things.
But you'll answer these in writing.
Yes.
Afterwards.
Yes.
I assume.
But what they were, I believe we had given protection to another counterparty and acquired that protection from AIG. So in effect, we had no real kind of equity risk, but we did have a credit risk to AIG, because we were required to perform on one side.
Sure.
And we needed them to perform on the other.
So you hedged yourself with AIG, in effect.
Correct.
Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
Okay. Since Goldman was regulated by the SEC, which I think began in about 2004, your leverage increased substantially from 2004 till about 2008. Why would leverage increase after you became regulated by the SEC?
You know, I don't have, the way we did leverage, the way we looked at leverage, under our regulatory regime, there was a notion of adjusted leverage, which didn't rate every asset the same way. So, for example, right now we sit here with a balance sheet of about $880 billion, but about $170 billion of that is cash, but it's on our balance sheet. So we assign a very low risk to that, and the regulation assigned a low risk. So we had notions of, our metric was an adjusted test. The Federal Reserve for bank holding companies has a gross leverage test, which again, I don't want to misspeak, but we never really focused on, and even at this moment, I don't think is as important as the risk-adjusted leverage test. Because how much capital do you have to have against cash?
I fully agree, but the leverage tests have been published in the newspapers, not tests, but leverage numbers have been published in the newspapers. People are under the impression that the investment banks became very highly leveraged after the SEC began to regulate them, and I'm trying to get at the
I'll have to get to
why that
you
happened.
what our leverage was at
Good.
each time, but the investment banks, as a gross term, there was comments, and I read some of the materials, 40, 60 times leverage. I think the high watermark of our leverage, which we never sat at, I think was in the mid-20s ever, as a high watermark, for example.
All right. In consistent terms, though, what you were leveraged before the SEC began to regulate you and impose Basel II
Yes,
on
we
you.
are now, and today we sit here literally on a gross basis with about half of our high watermark.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Mack, would you answer the same question, and that is, at least there have been reports that the investment banks became much more highly leveraged after the SEC took over regulation in about 2004 and imposed Basel II regulations. Could you respond to that, why that happened, or if it didn't happen, see if you can explain why these